Most of my teenage life was not very excited in the populous world. It was out on the range and working with the sheep and the livestock. I About the only people I knew was sheep herders, and most of them smoked, and a lot of them profaned and had bad language. Wonder I didn't pick up all these bad habits, but I didn't. When I was 15 years old, I went down to Aunt Losa's to go to school, and that was kind of enjoyable. It took me about 6 weeks, a month to get acquainted with any of the kids. As one boy lived right across the street, Lemoyne, Chris Jensen, and he was just a little bit younger than I, but we palled together, and Aunt Los had a brother-in-law named McCoy Johnson, about my age, and my clothes were so bad when I went down to Monroe that I got a job picking apples at night and doing chores and milking cows for other people, feeding pigs and chopping wood. I done everything, and finally I got 16 $1 bills. Just think of that, 16 of them. McCoy Johnson had to go get chicken feed because his father raised lots of chickens and sold lots of eggs. They lived quite a ways from Aunt Los, and I had to make lots of trips up there to get eggs. But anyway, they were a great family and helped me out all they could. But anyway, McCoy had to go to Richfield, and I went over to J.C. Penney's and bought me a suit of clothes. And because the clothes that I went from Tropic down there to go to school, it was so outdated it was just a shame. I was a freak. I remember the first day I went to school, I got my books and signed up and went up in the study room because I had to wait for a class to take place. I think it was an English class. And there's a lot of kids in there cutting up in the study room, and I went way off down in one corner, and pretty soon little notes started to pop around. Some of them lit on the close by me on the floor, and one of them popped on the desk. I opened it up, and he said, "Who in the hell are you, and where'd you come from?" That's the kind of clothes I had. I guess I was really a menagerie. But anyway, things began to iron out. I told Aunt Los I was going home, and I packed my suitcase, and I threatened to go home, but she begged me and cried and begged me, and finally I decided I would. One night after I'd got my chores done, we were eating supper, and a knock come on the door, and a strange man come in, and he said to Aunt Los, she knew who he was, "Who's that singing up to your place and whistling?" And she pointed to me, and she says, "My nephew, Herman Pollock, right there." He said, "Will you entertain us at MIA next Tuesday night?" Boy, my heart stopped beating, and I looked at Aunt Los, and then I looked at him, and I said, "No, sir, I won't entertain any time." Why, Aunt Los, I thought she was going to have a fainting fit or something. She just said, "Why, Herman Pollock, with all your talent, and you won't entertain?" I said, "No, Aunt Los, I won't entertain." And it's too long a story to tell you why. And I refused. Well, a month or so went by, and I still sang to the neighborhood as loud as I could sing, and whistle. That was just a habit. I'd farmed it on the range. I'd done it all around home. I couldn't help myself. I went up to school one morning, and as you go into the South Sevier High School, you have to go up some steps, and there's a big blackboard, bulletin board. On the bulletin board, our class was supposed to give the assembly program in the assembly the next Friday. That was on Monday morning. And, of course, I couldn't help her read it. It was all written in big writing because I recognized my name, and it said there'll be a solo by Herman Pollock. Boy, oh boy, I was sick all that day. Just made me sick. And I went home, told Aunt Lois, I said, I'm packing up and I'm going home for sure this time. Well, she begged me again, cried, and I give in and said I'd stay and tough it out. I went up the next day and told the planning board of the program that I couldn't sing in public. I couldn't sing in public. Didn't tell them, I don't remember whether I told them I was too scared, but anyway, I refused to sing in public. Well, they decided they'd do something about that. In English class that morning, why, we just got started in English class, and a messenger girl come in and handed me a note. Said, Mr. Pollock, you're wanted in a certain room, and I thought, well, maybe my schooling's over, maybe I can go home, maybe I'm going to be dispelled or something. And I went up to the the English teacher, and showed him this note, and he said, you better go. He said, that might be the superintendent. And so I went, and when I got there, the door was shut, and just a blank door, no sign on it or anything, and I stood there quite a while, whether to knock on that door and go in or not. But finally I opened it, and it just swung in easy, and I went in. 3 girls was right behind that door. There was another door, and it opened, and in and come another girl, and then some more girls behind her, and she sat down to the piano. She says, we know you know this song. It was You Tell Me Your Dreams and I'll Tell You Mine, one of the very latest songs. I'd picked it up in a hurry and knew it off by heart. She had the music, and she said, will you sing this? And I said, no, I won't sing it. Well, she says, you're not going to get out of here until you help us. You're a part of the class, and it's your solemn duty to help us with the program. We've heard you sing. We know you can sing. We know you have a beautiful voice, and you've got to help us. Well, I thought the thing through, and I thought, well, I'm not going to get out of here, not unless I help them sing this song. She said, if you won't sing it alone, will you sing it with me? I finally agreed to that. She had a beautiful soprano voice. So she started to sing, and I just picked up a part. I don't remember whether I sang the tenor or whether I sang the bass or alto, I don't know, but I took a part, and I sang it, and those girls was in that room gathered around us and just clapped, and boy, they was happy, and we sang the song, and well, it sounded pretty good. So I decided that I was kind of selfish, and I'd had my talents under a bushel basket long enough, and sooner or later I had to bring them out. So I sang the song in assembly with this lady, and they clapped us up, and we'd only practiced one song, so we sang it again, and they wanted us to sing it a third time, but we backed out. But then I found out if I could learn all the latest songs of the silent movies, theme songs, that I could get a free ticket to the show house. So this girl and I, we'd learn these songs. She'd play the piano, and I'd help her sing them, and we got a free ticket to the show house. That's the only way in this world I'd ever seen a show. Well, to make a long story short, I took part in an opera for the school, an opera for the church, and she and I took the lead parts. And I sang in assemblies in all the high schools in Sevier Valley, all the churches on a MIA road show, and I decided right there and then, and while I was down in Monroe, that if anybody asked me to sing, that I wouldn't turn them down, and I've tried to live up to that commitment all the rest of my life. Well, another time, I'd never had a real date with a girl in all my life. And I come in from sheep herd one time, and they's having a golden green ball. And in this golden green ball, they was giving prizes away. Come prizes for the best waltzer of the older people, the married couples, and then they had the prize waltz for the best young people. Well, I like to dance, and I went and got a pretty girl. Her name was Myrtle Riding here in Tropic. We went out and started the waltz, and she was a good dancer, and the judges selected her and I as the winners of the young people's waltzing. And so we went up to get her a prize, which was a box of chocolates. And the ladies, young ladies, MIA people, they decided to have some fun. They knew that I didn't go out with the girls, and they said, "You can't have it, Herm, not unless you'll promise to take her home." I looked at Myrtle, and she looked at me, and she smiled, and thought, well, she lives across the wash. Lives over there by old lady Cokerhance, and I'm scared to death to go over there, but I'll tackle it. I said, okay, I'll take her home. So they give me the box of chocolates, and I give it to Myrtle, and after the dance, we walked side by side up across the wash and over to her place, and I opened the gate and said good night, and I started to run. I run just as hard as I could run across that wash and over past Grandma's and over to our place. And that was the first time. But down in Monroe, when I picked out the group of young people that I wanted to associate with, they were lovely people, lots of fun. Every 2 weeks, that's twice a month, the boys would throw a supper, and they'd have rook games and other games, and just enjoy themselves and get around the piano, if there was a piano in the house, and sing. And then the next 2 weeks, the girls would pick their partners. Well, there was a lady down there that Mom and I knew later on in life, and I knew her then, and her name was Floral Nielsen, and her nickname was Forrest. Everybody called her Forrest. And she selected me to be her date. She had an older sister. Well, Aunt Lo, she done the best, and I had my new suit, and Aunt Lo, she done her best to get me all dolled up to go on this date. And I went down and walked by front of their place several times, and I knew it was time that I was going in, but I didn't want to go too early. I walked back and forth past the gate, and I guess her sister saw me. Finally, I took the gate. It was a squeaky gate. You couldn't help but let the whole neighborhood know I was coming. I knocked on the door, and her older sister, let me in. I don't remember, but she had some funning to do. She started to tease me, and she said, "Why don't you take me to the party? I'm older, and I'd be more fun than my sister." And she just teased the way out of me, and I really felt bad. But when Forrest come out, I got out of there as quick as I could with her, and we went to the party and had a good time. I brought her back home and opened the gate for her and said good night. And I ran all the way home to Aunt Losa's place. And but very few times that I ever had any association with the girls because I didn't have any money. It cost money to go to dances. I don't believe I only went to about 1 or 2 dances, and all the while I was in Monroe. Most of those I had to entertain, church dances. But anyway, I come back home, went on the range after I couldn't go to school, and I stayed there very seldom did I ever come home. My brothers and sisters grew up, and I hardly knew them. Afton and Herman, May and Verdine and Lemoyne. And I just stayed on the range. Dad was got to be county commissioner the first time, and he was in the church, had high offices, stake president and bishop counselor all this time, and he was so busy, tied up home, and but many experiences on the range. I tell one, Dad got up one morning, he said, "Herm, it's deer season time." He said, "Everybody's hunting deer." We camped on Cat Bench way down in the Priya River. And he said, "Why don't you take the gun and go out and get us a nice buck?" So I took the gun and I walked up around a big deep canyon, a big platinum red ledges like Zion's Canyon. Oh, it's a beautiful place. And I crossed over on what they call Cat Bench or Cat Trails and got a shot at a big old buck. And he was laying down the sagebrush, and he just jumped up and started to run, and I shot, and I wounded him. So he went around a big old slide and around another big head of a canyon, and I could track him in the deep sand easy. I just going around and looked up a sand slide up under the big high white ledges, and there's a big long leaf or sawlog ponderosa pine growing there, and I heard a snort. Animal snorting. I looked up, and it was 3 sheep. They were looking right down at me. And I thought, well, they could be Dad's, they could be anybody's. I don't know who they are. And I had the gun. I decided I wouldn't kill one. But they started to run, and finally started to run, and one of them couldn't keep up with the other two. The other two were just leaving it, and I could tell it was hurt. So I decided I'd kill it. So I shot it, and they were John H. Johnson sheep. They'd never been sheared for at least 2 years. They had real long wool and shaggy wool in places where they'd brushed it off. This poor sheep, a cougar or wildcat or something, the bobcat had been on its back and just had big old laceration sores all over its back. It was a mercy shot that I killed the poor thing. And I found out 2 sheep it was. Then I went over where I'd shot this deer, and after I took care of it, I come back, walked back to camp, and I figured on getting the mule and going getting it, and I jumped a whole bunch of deer. There's about 11 or 12 deer, several bucks in the outfit. So I told Dad where they were, and he prayed on his mind. The next morning he said, "Herm, you heard the sheep. I'm going to go hunting deer." I told him right where the one I had was, and he went, and he never come back till after dark. It was dark when he come in with the mule. And he was blood from one end of his shirt was bloody, his breeches, his bib overalls was bloody. And he said, "Son, we've got an awful big day tomorrow." And so he killed 8 head of deer, counting the one I had. So he took a meat saw and what sacks we had. Took us all day long to get them meat down into the creek where we could load them on mules. And I took 4 mules, and they was loaded just to the brim. They couldn't have held any more. And up that old Priya Creek I went as after dark. About 11:30, I come through Tropic and went over to the back street on the north side of town and up, and then come back into Dad's stackyard and unloaded the mules. And wee hours of the morning, I got that meat all hung up down in the old root cellar and apple cellar. Dad had some big poles and a lot of nails along there. He'd wrote a letter to Mother, and when Mother woke me up the next morning, I was dead tired. She said, "You've got a lot of work to do." She said, "You've got to deliver all that meat." I said, for heaven's sakes, who to? She said, the widows. Dad was the bishop at that time, and I took all this meat, but just a very little, to the widows. And they were very appreciative. They have some deer meat. That was when I was a teenager. Another time I was on in what they call Johnson Holes, and I was taking the sheep to water. I was on top of quite a high ledge. Oh, it must have been 200 or 300 feet high. A lot of deep sand down underneath it. I stepped on a rock, and that rock caved off with me, and I just went like a parachute down through the air, and I lit down in that deep sand and just paralyzed my legs and back. Wonder I could ever walk away, but I laid there semi-conscious, and finally Island come and found me, and oh boy, I was hurt for a few days, but I toughed it out and finally got to where I could walk and ride a horse decent again. That just when that rock fell with me, the air got to going so fast I couldn't breathe, and I just sort of blacked out. I don't ever remember hitting the sand, but when I come to, I was just sitting in the sand, laying like in the sand. That was a terrible shock. I used to like to carve my name in the rocks and places, and I used to hunt arrowheads and all down in that country, and the hieroglyphics, I used to see those, and that was a beautiful part of my life. One day I went into Deer Creek and found the head of a mountain sheep and a black obsidian arrowhead and some sandals and some bone awls. I just had all I could tie on the saddle in the crack of the ledge one day. Well, the Priya River is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it was my home. It was my bed ground and my schoolhouse, and I love it to this very day. It's a very beautiful canyon, perhaps the most beautiful canyon in the whole Colorado River drainage. I spent a good lot of my life before I was married and after I was married. When I'd come home, why, most generally, I'd have a little money in my pocket, and most generally my boy friends was broke flat, and if there's a dance going on or anything, why, I'd buy their tickets. I can remember even taking them to hiring a car and going clear to Escalante and buying their dance tickets in Escalante. Then about this time, why, this is when I was very young. When I was around home, why, we had a music teacher come in, his name was Ray Davenport, and he started a little orchestra, and we got a pair of drums, and he taught me how to beat the drums, and I beat the drums while he was orchestra, and we played in Cannonville and Henryville and Panguitch and a few places like that, and a lot of dances in Tropic, and I learned to play the drums. And then later on, why, after I bought a guitar, I got an electric guitar and played for dances for 27 years. And played for, most of them was free dances, like building, ward building a committee to have us play free to build certain things on the church house, and benefit dances and weddings and missionary dances. These were all free dances. Played for junior proms and high school dances. I used to play the rhythm in a dance. There's 5 of us in the orchestra, James and Cy Munson, Elva Clark, and George Thompson. Sometimes we had different drummers. But we traveled over and done a lot of entertaining that way. I can remember when in the summertime, I'd ride in off in the range over to Bryce Canyon National Park. In those days, they didn't have a recreation hall at the old Union Pacific Lodge. They had a big round ring of rocks, and they'd build a big bonfire, and all the help, the bellhops, the waitresses, cabin maids, and kitchen help would all get out and they'd entertain the tourists around this campfire. But whenever I rode in there, well, I kind of dressed up in my cowboy boots and I had a foxy shirt and a big hat. I guess I was quite appealing to the tourists. And I could whistle and I could yodel and I could sing, and they had somebody accompany me. I'd do a lot of singing. And I can remember entertaining around that old fire. Well, many things happened when I was a teenager. It's a wonder I didn't lose my life. I had a riding a horse out in what they call Death Holler one time, and I was going up a big steep hill, and it'd been lots of moisture, and the horse started to stumble and fight the earth, and all at once it began to move. And the horse went down and throwed me, and I lit in a big old black greasewood bush. And it caused lacerations and scratches all over me, but I just stayed right in that bush, and it just went down the hill, and finally the dust got so bad I couldn't see. But it held me, and I just rode the slide down, and when I got to the bottom, why, there my horse was with broken neck, is dead. My brand new saddle was all scabbed up, scratched up. And I remember Dad out on sheep flat, and I moved into by an old kraal, and the tumbleweeds had blowed up against it. And the sheep wouldn't, it's kind of a moonlight night, and the sheep wouldn't lay on bed ground. We fought them all night long, but we soon found out. Before the night was over, we'd killed 7 rattlesnakes right by our tent. Boy, did we ever get out of there that next morning. We sure did get out of there in a hurry. And there's lots and lots of things that happened in my teenage years out on the range. I guess I could safely say that I was a pretty good bronc buster. I broke quite a few horses, but I broke them very selfishly, made them so nobody else would really ride them, and broke them so they was afraid of me, and I was their boss, and they done just exactly what I wanted them to do. But, oh, I've rode some terrible horses. I remember one time going down the lane, and we had a horse, and every time we'd put it in the pasture so it could get fresh, we'd have to break it over again. It'd buck every time, and Dad was scared to death of it. Boy, I got on it one morning and rode it around the stackyard a little while and out the gate and started out the sheep herd, and thought, well, this is one morning the old fellow's not going to break. I'm going to buck. So I rode down the street and over and started over towards the East Valley where the sheep herd was. We owned lots of land over there then. And I met Ursulot coming up the street, and he was on a horse. I remember the horse's name was Shaft. He was a big bay horse. And that white horse that I called Buck, he just had his eyes waiting for the opportunity. We rode up to each other and said hello, and I reached over, and he kind of reached over, and we went to shake hands, and down went my horse's head when I wasn't watching, so he'd get his head down, and he let a beller out, and away he went a-bucking. Well, this horse of Ursul's got excited, and it started to buck. It was going around, and I watching him while my horse was bucking, and finally I seen Ursul go off his horse and land on the road, and my horse turned around, and then from then on the battle got real bad, and I just forgot the whole world. And when I woke up, I was quite a ways down the lane below where Evans Off lives, and when I come to and got that horse stopped bucking, I was up by Obie Shakespeare's. It bucked about 3 blocks, and the blood was running out of my ears, out of my nose, and out of my mouth, and I was sore for a week after that. Boy, did he ever shake me up. Well, many and many a time. I remember one time over in East Valley that we moved the ewes and lambs, and it was very hot, and we was going to leave the valley and go to the summer range, and lots of deep washes. We were on the slope, north slope of Cold Bench, that's east of Tropic. Lots of deep washes went down into another big wash that come down into the Priya River. We decided that quite a lot of ewes was, we'd left some lambs behind. And so we went back hunting these lambs back to the bed ground. It got so hot that they laid down in shades of washes and banks and brush. And gosh, we had more lambs than we could handle. Darker than a dungeon. I'll never know how it happened or why it happened, but I just letting my horse go down through these washes is by itself, and Claude Cedricks, he had his hands full of little lambs, and I had my hands full of lambs. And all at once, my horse fell in one of them washes. And I went down under the horse's belly, and the little lambs all went down with me. And when I kind of got my breath, I'd lost my breath. When I hit the bank and lost my breath, and poor old Claude was out on top. He knew I'd felt, he could hear the disturbance down in this voice. He knew I was down in there, and he kept hollering, "Herm, are you all right? Are you all right? Are you dead? Herm, speak to me." Kept crying all the time, and